Clay, can we start with the Canadian trucker thing? Because I think this is fascinating. It's still going strong up in Ottawa. More convoys now forming around the world. People are seeing a momentum here. But two fascinating and deeply troubling things happened over the weekend. One, the Canadian government just decided to go in and seize the gasoline. They're trying to refill these trucks in place in Ottawa just to take it to effectively try to stop the protests. It's obviously wintertime in Canada, quite cold there. So we can get into that. But also GoFundMe, a platform. This is the thing, folks. These platforms become huge, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or GoFundMe or Spotify, promising freedom and transparency and openness. And then they become weaponized by the left. GoFundMe accepts money for the truckers and then was in the process of giving that money to left-wing, whether it's BLM or community organizer organizations, until Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, and others came out and said, that's fraud, by the way. You can't actually accept money for a cause and then divert it to someone else because you feel like it.
All of this, Buck, is evidence of what I believe is the Great Unraveling. We said, and we've talked a lot on this show, about how COVID has made red redder and blue bluer. But I think it's also opened the eyes of a lot of people. And I think you can tie this in with the Olympics and the way that that's being covered. We effectively need to have structures in place of every business that is left-leaning. There needs to be a right-wing competitor. And you can say that that structure is underway, right? For instance, Rumble is a video competitor of YouTube. Now, it's a lot smaller, but they just offered $100 million to Joe Rogan if he ends up getting kicked off Spotify. I think that's a really smart move. But when I saw this GoFundMe news come down, Buck, on, I guess it was Friday night, because they tried to drop it, I think, late in the evening on Friday, hoping it would kind of get snowed under, my jaw dropped. And it's hard for me to be surprised by things. It wasn't just that they were trying to shut down the truckers. It was that they were taking the next move, Buck, of taking, I think it was $9 million that had been raised for truckers and the support of their protest, and they were going to redirect that $9 million to entities that were the exact opposite of who people had been donating to and for. Right now, I immediately said, oh, my God, this is clearly fraud, and I'm glad that they backed down. But the idea that, you remember GoFundMe wouldn't allow Kyle Rittenhouse, if I remember correctly, to raise money. They have consistently refused, and that was a big deal to me, because everybody has the right, regardless of whether you agree or disagree, especially obviously in the result there of him being not guilty, but everybody has the right to the best attorney that they can afford. That's embedded in our criminal justice system, in our entire fabric of laws. So this idea that you can't even give money to causes that are seen as being right-wing. And by the way, how in the world are the truckers right-wing? They want to get back to normalcy. We got to stop allowing this to be painted as a crazy idea that at some point we should all around the world be able to get back to the universe that we were living in January and February and early March of 2020, before insanity took over in this country and around the world.
I would bet that some of these truckers have voted in the past for Democrat, liberal-type Canadians. Guaranteed. These are guys who, just like, in this country, there are people that are truckers who have a long-standing, history and maybe even family history going back a ways with Teamsters and unions. And so there's a labor component of this. And notice how this element of people that are of the laboring classes is so undermined by the tech oligarchs and the tech billionaire elite, and the Democrat corporate media has nothing to say about it. Clay, what everyone's watching unfold in real time, and it has to do with the GoFundMe situation and the calls. Remember, they were calling to kick Rogan off of Spotify a week ago. We were talking about this before any of the racially charged language issue came to the forefront. This has to do with a true front of tyranny that we are seeing from the Democrat Party, and it's really a mentality that COVID has exposed in much of the modern world today, where they want it the way that they demand it, or else they're going to crush you. There's no more sense of fair play. There's no sense of individual liberty, of constitutional restraint. Every country has its own political realities, but you look at what we would have called the Western world or Western civilization until pretty recently, you say, what has happened? What has happened in America, in Canada, in the UK, in Australia, in Europe? You go down the line, you say countries like us, and of course here at home too, have abandoned core principles. They have decided that all of a sudden the Constitution in this country doesn't count. In other countries, whatever they have as protections of the rights have gone away. And the media apparatus here is just going along with it all. It's deeply troubling. The whole thing is stunning.
You're exactly right on all that. And, Buck, what we have reached is an inflection point. Everybody has to pick a side. I understand there are people out there who look around, and I've been one of these people before, right? I've talked about my path and my journey to what I believe and how COVID accelerated that in many ways. But there's a lot of people out there, Buck, and we talk to many of these people every single day who say, I kind of like the Republicans. I kind of like the Democrats. They both drive me insane. These are the people who end up deciding who wins an election, right? Because there's a certain segment that's going to vote Democratic, certain segment that's going to vote Republican. You can't be wishy-washy anymore. You can't be a libertarian who says, I can't really decide between the Democrats and the Republicans. This is pretty straightforward, and this is direct, and I want everybody listening out there to think about this. You're either for freedom, and you are for basic democratic ideals of the United States government that believe in equality, but also in a foundational premise that the United States is a force for good in the world, or you are a Democrat. I mean that seriously, because Democrats have abandoned, to me, any pretense. And I think Joe Rogan is learning this, because Joe Rogan tried to be a straight down the middle of the road guy. He said, hey, I might vote for Bernie Sanders. And they put out the long knives and they came for him. And nobody on the left in this country has stood up for Joe Rogan at all. Now, to their credit, lots of people on the right side, if you want to call that, of the political equation, have said, hey, I maybe not be a Joe Rogan fan, but I don't believe in cancel culture. Same thing we said about Whoopi Goldberg. You either believe that you can basically be attacked by mobs online and have every fabric of your ability to earn a living stripped from you, or you are a Republican.
Yeah.
I mean that is the truth
this
right
is
now.
The
Those
binary.
are the choices.
This is the
yes.
Yeah, you're right. This is the binary that we're in, and you can also break it down into you have principles or you have situational principles. I mean, you have principles,
situational ethics,
or your situational ethics are a joke, and this is what we're seeing all over the place, including, by the way, with the COVID restrictions.
Spotify CEO came out and basically wrote a long-form piece where he essentially said, hey, we're going to contribute $100 million more towards different, I guess, less distributed, potentially minority programming. But I was having a conversation, like I bet a lot of you were as well, about cancel culture in the wake of Whoopi Goldberg and sort of the chaos of the past week and everybody coming for Joe Rogan. The Rock, who a lot of you know, Dwayne Johnson, initially comes out and says that he's supportive of Rogan, and then he changes his mind, and then people start going through all of The Rock's comments over the years and pointing out that he said a lot of questionable, and I'm using my quotation mark fingers there, things over the years in WWE and online. A lot of clips, Buck, I know you saw this. Howard Stern, who now is in the good graces of the woke community, wore blackface and used really kind of unbelievable language in multiple skits. Those video feeds were circulating on Twitter. And so I had this conversation with my wife, and I bet a lot of people out there did as well. Spotify is interesting. Are you a subscriber to Spotify, Buck? Do you pay for a subscription on Spotify right now?
I do.
Okay. So, I mean, they have like 100 million people out there who subscribe to Spotify. My wife will
I greatly prefer the iHeart app, however.
My wife will look a lot of times because she does training and everything else to see what songs are trending. And she pointed out that while people are supposedly outraged by Joe Rogan, well over half of the top artists on any given day use the N-word in their songs or their rap music or whatever else, with virtually no discussion of it at all. And even if you want to take a step back and say, okay, let's avoid the use of the N-word, the lyrics of many rap songs are wildly misogynistic. And she is it was discussing, what was so fascinating was the left, if you remember, Buck. Do you remember the Two Live Crew battle that went all the way to the Supreme Court over what was and was not considered to be explicit lyrics? Even back in the day, if you remember NWA and their song Cop Killer, and what was permissible and what was not. And if you remember, creative artists at that time stood up for other creative people and said music shouldn't be censored. And now you have those same artists coming out against Joe Rogan and saying not only should this guy be censored, many of them are saying that his product itself shouldn't even be distributed. And I just think it's an interesting window into the transition in the creative space over what is considered to be acceptable, and even what creative people are willing to say that now they are the censorious forces in our culture.
Because I don't believe, Clay, that this was ever rooted in a lot of these individuals in actual principle. I think that they were, one, benefiting from it at the time, and two, they were trying to tear down a power structure that they then seek to supplant with their own. You look at leftists. I mean, and by the way, we're talking in some cases about people, whether it's Joni Mitchell or Howard Stern, who became incredibly wealthy by attacking the establishment under the idea that it was about free speech and freedom, who are now the same people. I'm not even just saying the same political party, the same people who are advocates of that censorship. So I think that there was a falseness to it. It's a little bit like somebody who advocates for democracy, one vote, one person, one time, right? Once they're in power, all of a sudden the rules all change. And I think you're seeing that with the way that a lot of people who, as I said, became very rich and very influential have now decided that it wasn't really about freedom. It was about the freedom that they want, and now denying freedom to other people in what they're able to say. And just on the usage of the word that we're all not allowed to say, or rather some people are not allowed to say, this is a little bit like, the way that you have to mask up on planes or else. You can't say this word in any context if you are, outside of the black community, or else you risk the destruction of your career and being kicked out of, public life, and everyone saying you're horrible and a racist. And when I say in any context, as you and I have talked about, court stenographer reading back, people will get upset at someone. You are to replace the word. You're not allowed to say, I disagree in principle that there can be words that some people are allowed to say in any context, always and however they want, and other people, if they even say the word not in a context as a pejorative or to attack somebody, if they merely quote someone, their life should be destroyed. This is about power, friends. This is about who has it and who doesn't, because you cannot believe in the First Amendment and free speech as a principle and think that there can be words that people are banned from using in any context entirely on pain of destruction of who they are as a person in society. It's crazy when you think about it. And there's no other word for which this is the rule.
Right. We have FCC Restrictions as the biggest radio show in the country. So there are all different sorts of words that we're not allowed to say on the radio based on that. But Buck, when I wrote my most recent book, I quoted Muhammad Ali. It's called Republicans Buy Sneakers Too, and it's about how left-wing and woke ideology took over the world of sports, which used to unite us all. And my editor said, hey, are you sure you want to quote Muhammad Ali? You're a white guy, but he uses the N-word. And I said, that's a famous Muhammad Ali quote. Yes. I mean, it distracts. Like, we're not, if I curse in the book, and I didn't curse that much in the book, but I'm like, we don't do dash, dash, dash on the pages of the book. The goal is to talk to people as adults. And Buck, where I would say I'm so fascinated by sort of, let's say, the interplay between Joe Rogan and Howard Stern. Howard Stern, if you watch Private Parts, if you studied anything that he did, he was wildly more offensive than anything Joe Rogan has ever said. I think what happens is the culture has evolved. Howard Stern knows all the things that he did in his past. He sees the power of cancel culture. And I believe a guy like Howard Stern has made a calculated decision to go far left wing as an effort to try to get what we'll call woke insurance. Because if he's out there saying Donald Trump is the worst human being who has ever lived, even though, by the way, he had Donald Trump on his radio show all the time back in the day, then he believes that the cancel culture maniacs are not going to come for him because he's on the right team. I see this all the time in creative industry. I see it in the sports world where people privately will say, hey, Clay, I agree with everything you say. And then publicly, they are a part of the woke sports community because they are all afraid that at some point the woke universe is going to come for them. And so even if they don't believe it, they genuflect at the altar of wokeness to try to protect the jobs that they have. And I think that's why so much of our society today is complete BS, because people say lies all the time.
I speak to friends of mine about this, and taking into account everything we talk about today, Clay, whether it's COVID madness or cancel culture and the impact of, remember, the woke control the apparatus of communication in this country more than at any time in honestly, in living memory. I mean, with social media and now even something like Spotify, which is supposed to just be a platform for music and podcasts, but now they're supposed to act as editors. They've pulled dozens of Joe Rogan episodes already.
Hundreds. They pulled over 100 episodes
of Joe Rogan episodes. I see it and I wonder. I ask the question, just in general, are we really a free country anymore? You have to really think about that a little bit more now than we have in a long time. After the shutdown of churches during COVID, after the mask restrictions and the stay-at-home orders, and people now losing their jobs for this or that, whether it's not getting a vaccine or saying the wrong thing. We think of ourselves as a free country. Is Australia, and this is what I say to them then, is Australia a free country? Because I would argue no. I think that that's pretty clear. So why do we think that we are still a free country? And I really mean this. I want to push people on this. I want them to think more about it because, going back to just getting some crumbs from the freedom table here is not good enough. We need a full-on counterpunch. We need a counterstrike against the madness of the last few years. And I really think in many ways the left was broken by Trump. And then as a result of it, it's very hard to find common ground. Even someone like a Bill Maher, for example, is almost an aberration these days. He's a lib. He's a climate change obsessed, in many ways, right along with the Democrat Party, obviously very pro-choice and all these other things. And was a fan in the early days of Biden, and he's going to shut down COVID. Clay, he just says things that should be painfully obvious to anyone now. And mainstream Democrats look at him like he's crazy. Because I think we have fallen into a place where we are certainly not as free a country as we used to be. And I'm not even sure you can say these days it really is a free country.
Well, that's why 2022 is so important, Buck. That's why 2022 needs to be an utter destruction. Because there have to be consequences for your kids having to wear masks for 2 years, even though it made no sense. There have to be consequences for the labeling of essential and non-essential businesses. There have to be consequences for all of the failures of the Biden administration. Because if there are not, then lies, defund the police, all of these things that were 100% wrong, then we don't have a civil society. Because you have to hold politicians accountable when they make poor decisions. That's the entire purpose of democracy. And so to me, 2022 has to be a destruction. And by the way, think about how far we've come, Buck. Remember George Carlin, 7 words you can't say on TV? That was what comedy was. It pushed boundaries of acceptability, and the masses embraced them. Now the same people of that George Carlin era are arguing the Joe Rogans of the world or the Buck Sextons or the Clay Travises are not able to say everything that they believe because it makes some people out there feel a little bit sad, or it forces them to examine the cognitive dissonance underlying much of their belief system. That's what the marketplace of ideas should do. That's why, regardless of whether you agree or disagree with someone, I don't agree with Whoopi Goldberg. She was an idiot, Buck. But we had a discussion as a nation to point out her idiocy, and I think as a result, the nation grew. I don't think she should be suspended. I don't think she should be canceled, but I think the marketplace of ideas should flourish.